For the invitation to be here and bring you some remarks on behalf of Commissioner Troxler and NCDA. And particularly, I think everybody would agree that we've been in a time of transition and inflection points for a number of years now. So it gets a little old to say that over and over again, but that's actually truly been the case. So when we look at where we stand right now across agriculture in 2020, I have to sit there, I have to think, can we strike a more positive outlook? Can we look at things a little bit differently than maybe we did at the end of 2018 and going into 2019? And I think there are some bright spots out there. One of the ways that we have gotten to where we are, of course, is as a result of the storms in 2018 and even the economic storm that was brewing well before that, we put together in the state of North Carolina the State Disaster Assistance Program. And we should not lose sight of the fact that in this politically charged environment, which is getting more and more politically charged every day, as you well know, that was a program that provided assistance to North Carolina agriculture to the tune of $240 million in direct payments that passed unanimously in the House, in the Senate, in the General Assembly. And I suppose there have probably been some other pieces of legislation that have come along and had unanimous support, but I don't know if any of them for agriculture, especially with that kind of a dollar figure, that have in the past. Hopefully we won't have to go back to that well in the future, but it has done, I think, what it was designed to do, which was to provide a bridge from 2018 into 2019, and hopefully got people to the point where we are now if they needed that assistance. And I checked this morning because we're wrapping up that program. I think we've sent out all the payments that we can send out, and tobacco specifically. We wrote checks out of the Department of Agriculture using that appropriation to $66.7 million just for tobacco support. And of course other commodities benefited from that as well, but that's huge. That's huge. And on the federal level, some assistance has come through whatever you want to call WIP 2.0. Finally the Congress passed that, and they're finally getting some of that money out the door. And we think that there will be some more assistance coming to North Carolina through the form of USDA block grant assistance. We've been in negotiations with USDA for quite some time. None of those things, whatever comes past, will not be direct payments in the form of the State Disaster Program, WIP 2.0, and that kind of thing, but it will be block grants around forestry, stream debris cleanup, and those kind of things that will hopefully set North Carolina up. And the new catchphrase you hear all the time is resiliency, and maybe make us more prepared in the future for some of those natural disasters that have come along. So you think about what other points of optimism can we look to in 2020? Perhaps, and I know you can look at the markets today and look at them Monday and probably come to completely different conclusions, but perhaps there's beginning to be some leveling off in the commodity markets. At least that's what Nick Piggott would have said back in January, and things do change quickly, but that's what I heard at the commodity conference. As you look at world demand for agricultural products, there are some fundamental things there that do favor agriculture. One is population is still growing. In certain parts of the world, income is growing. And demand for protein continues to grow. And China has its share of problems, and I'm going to talk about coronavirus in a moment, but one of those problems has been African swine fever. And African swine fever, it's hard to say exactly how much it has affected the hog herd, if you want to call it that, in China, but probably 40 or 50% of it is not there today that was there 2 years ago. So with world growing demand for protein, that has not changed, but where is it going to come from? And I think that creates opportunities for North Carolina for our pork and poultry industries for sure. There are some bright spots there for trade. The deal with China, or excuse me, Japan has been signed. The USMCA agreement has been signed. I don't know if we would say that that's completely good for North Carolina, because there are some issues there with labor. In particular, if you could solve that, we'd appreciate that soon. But one of those issues there in the USMCA agreement is, y'all all know what your adverse wage is here in North Carolina, and for that type of labor around fruits and vegetables in Mexico, what I have been told is that the wage rate is $6.88 a day. So when the USMCA provides more access for those commodities to the United States, that's a challenge that we're going to have in the future. Most people would say that USMCA is overall not negative and maybe even positive for agriculture. Maybe the big news that came along on the trade front was obviously the signing of Phase 1 deal with China. And tobacco specifically was mentioned as one of the commodities that would benefit from the Phase 1 agreement. And that in itself, just to have tobacco mentioned in that, I think is a big victory. Commissioner Troxler, I know, worked very hard on that, and many of you did as well, to have tobacco specifically mentioned in that Phase 1 agreement with China. Now, the implementation of Phase 1 has been hampered by the coronavirus issues, and I'll talk a little bit about that more in a little bit. Coming on the horizon from a trade standpoint, the United Kingdom has officially Brexited from the European Union. They're in negotiations right now with the European Union on new trade deals. And the beginnings of those negotiations are taking place with the United States. And it's important for us in North Carolina to have a seat at that table every chance that we can. The United Kingdom is not a huge market in and of itself. It is significant. It's not as big as all of Europe. But hopefully what we can find out of those negotiations with the United Kingdom would be a little bit more of what we would perceive as being sanity around some of the agricultural practices that we have in the United States with GMOs, with confined animal operations, animal agriculture in general. So hopefully there will be a little bit more receptiveness to modern agriculture out of the United Kingdom than what we found in the European Union in the past. Closer to home in North Carolina, sweet potato exports continue at a good pace to the European Union and other parts around the world. So that's one of the bright spots that we can find. But when we talk about those, particularly with the trade deal with China, something that I don't think anybody anticipated has now reared its head, and that's the coronavirus. And so I'm not an expert on coronavirus, thankfully, and Peter, you haven't been to China recently, so we're good there. And so we don't have to worry about those kind of things. But we do have a contracted employee in Beijing with NCDA who has been giving us some very interesting information I'd like to share with you out of our Beijing office. His report that we got yesterday, I thought was fairly optimistic. Danny Dean is the guy's name. And I think Danny has pretty well spent the last 2 months at home with his wife and his child. He said the bright spot out of this is his cooking has improved. And they have gotten to know each other very well because they just quite simply haven't been able to go to work. That's how much coronavirus has stalled that economy. That is beginning to change. And on Monday, Danny will be able to go back to work on Monday morning. They still won't be receiving foreign visitors to the office complex that he has, but they're going to open it back up and begin to resume somewhat normal operations. There are another interesting part of that is there's a part of the economy in China that has actually benefited from the coronavirus, and that's the online retailers. Because if you can't go out to spend money, you've ordered it in, and the online retailers, whatever Amazon is in China, apparently has done quite a bit of business. But the Chinese economy is going to change over some as things go back to normal, because those folks who have had physical locations like shops and restaurants, those kind of things, they may not have been able to pay their rent recently. But what he does see, and I think this makes a lot of sense, is that as things begin to resume whatever normal is in China, there will be a lot of pent-up demand. Folks have stayed home basically for 2 months. They've got money now that they didn't spend for 2 months as they were living at home, learning how to cook and get along with their family. So there is some pent-up demand that will be released in a very short order in China. There also is likely to be another transformation in some of their purchasing habits. If you look back to the last big epidemic in China was in 2003 with the SARS epidemic. And one of the things that changed with the purchasing habits of the middle class after SARS is they began to equate food safety with a healthy lifestyle and more healthy living in general. What that translated to was increased demand that has stayed there over the years for food products that are not produced in China. And food products from the United States carry quite a bit of premium in China. So I think what we will see as things begin to resume back to normal in China with the coronavirus outbreak is we'll see another transformation in what their purchasing preferences are. The middle class is the one that's driving that in China, and that middle class today is much larger than it was back in 2003. How much time is this going to take is one of the major questions. Well, they've been at home for 2 months. They're beginning to go back to work. Some commerce is beginning to come back. It probably will be 1 to 2 months, if not maybe 2 to 4 months in the analysis that we've been receiving before you begin to see a somewhat normal flow of goods and services and things like that took place prior to the coronavirus outbreak. Another factor there is the Chinese government is now and will feel continuing pressure to meet the president's objectives of growing their economy. Peter, I believe the number is 6% is the minimum that he wants to grow the economy each year. So there will be increased pressure on the Chinese government to come back to the table with the United States and maybe phase 2, whatever that looks like, will occur faster than it would have normally, because they've got to get this economy going and kick-started as quickly as possible. So where does that leave tobacco at the moment? Well, we did receive word, and many of you probably did too, that there will be another round of tariff exemptions that take place soon. Tobacco is eligible for those tariff exemptions in China. They've already issued some tariff exemptions on other U.S. agricultural products. Tobacco is not one of them right now, and our understanding is that takes a request from CTI, or China Tobacco International, out of Beijing, which has not happened right now. And I know Peter and the commissioner and all of us have been in close contact with our folks in Cary, the China Tobacco North America. They're not able to make that call. Of course, they want to purchase our tobacco just as much as we'd like to sell their tobacco, but that call is going to be made in Beijing. Right now, as of this morning, the general feeling is that probably food products will take precedence there and be the first to receive some of those tariff exemptions. But I think if you've been around China Tobacco and understand how they operate and the folks in Beijing, that can all change with a phone call from one person. So all of that is yet to play out. We don't know exactly where all of that's going to go, but I think what we can say is that there are some possibilities now that exist that maybe we didn't see back in December, November, October, and back into 2019. So I think there is some reason for optimism there. With our tobacco situation in the United States, probably the question is, have we now hit the bottom, and are we on our way back up? And time will tell on that. We've had the commissioner and several of us have had a lot of meetings with the companies over the last several months, and we have emphasized over and over again that we believe that a sustainable level of tobacco production in the United States is 400 million pounds of flue cure. 400 million pounds of flue cure. Will we get there? I don't know. We've got to have China to get there, and we've got to have some changes and probably some other things with the companies. But that's what we believe is sustainable. So you get around the question of what does sustainability mean? And it means a lot of different things to a whole lot of different people. However, when we look at North Carolina and we look at the sustainability of North Carolina agriculture, a message that's got to get through to the CEOs and the folks that do not live in North Carolina is that tobacco is a major part of the sustainability of our agricultural economy in this state. We are in the sweet potato business today largely because we have been in the tobacco business. And it's very, very intertwined, and it's in ways that you don't often think of. The sweet potato and tobacco connection with labor is an obvious one, but a lot of that labor also will leave a sweet potato farm in eastern North Carolina and will go to western North Carolina and harvest Christmas trees, which is a major industry in this state. So the connections are not just in eastern North Carolina, they're all across this state. And so this is the health and the sustainability, the viability of the tobacco industry is tied at the hip to the health and the sustainability and the viability of agriculture all across North Carolina. That's a message that we've all got to carry every chance that we get. Sustainability to a lot of tobacco companies is something that they like to preach to shareholders. And if you've seen some of the literature that companies have with shareholders, the things that they do for communities in the third world is something that plays well with shareholders. And I'm not trying to disparage that. Those things are important. But in North Carolina, sustainability does not mean just a tobacco farm. That message is sustainability for rural communities across North Carolina. It's churches, it's hospitals, it's schools, it's the fabric of the economy we have. So when they support tobacco in North Carolina and support tobacco across the United States, in the southeastern United States, they're supporting entire communities and entire economies. So that's a message that we want to get through as loudly and as clearly as possible. So there are some reasons, I think, to see some opportunities and some optimism that we might not have seen in December, again, back in 2019, 2018. We still got our challenges, and our challenges are complicated. I think any time you talk about tobacco challenges, it's complicated. Y'all know that way better than I do. We have a guava root knot nematode issue, which y'all are probably familiar with, especially if you're in the sweet potato industry. That is a challenge, and it is complicated. And we're starting to see some of that in the western part of the state with being able to ship Christmas trees and greenery. Y'all may or may not have heard, but we've got a hemp program in North Carolina. Have y'all heard that recently? That one's a little bit of a challenge, and that one is extremely complicated, and I don't know if I even want to start down that road here in this discussion. But to give you an example of how complicated it can be, again, going back to the trade part of this, when the president and USDA issued the trade mitigation funds and the payments related to that with what do they call it, the market facilitation program, I guess. If you think back to, there are always good things with good policy, but there's also unintended consequences that we have to try our best to anticipate. So if you look back to this time, well, a little later than this time last year, as the corn crop, soybean crop was being planted in the Midwest, the thing we all heard about was it was so wet, they had their flooding, they had their rains, they just weren't getting the crop planted the way that normally it was lagging way behind. As it turns out, a lot of that crop was planted in July, a lot of that corn crop in the Midwest. So you have to ask the question, why was it planted in July when normally without any other factor there, a prevent plant decision and crop insurance would have been the most economical way for a farmer to go with a corn crop that late in the Midwest. The market facilitation payments, the trade mitigation payments that were made, however, changed that financial equation for most farmers in the Midwest. So a lot of corn ended up on the market and being planted and produced that would not have otherwise been. In North Carolina, that is one of the factors that kept commodity prices depressed through the end of 2019, because the policy from USDA tied that payment to acres in 2019. You had to plant it to get the check. So there are unintended consequences with a lot of policy and it just underscores the fact that as we move forward, and policy is so important, it's really complicated, and we've got to, in agriculture, we've got to study these things very closely at all times. So I've talked a lot about commodities that are not tobacco, but I've also mentioned a lot of the ways that it's intertwined, and it all is very intertwined together. And we should never lose fact of this, that we are now 2% or less of the population in agriculture, in production agriculture, 2% or less. And so when that's the case, a sweet potato issue is not just a sweet potato issue. A tobacco issue is not just a tobacco issue. A cotton issue is not just a cotton issue. It's all an agricultural issue. And we are tied together. We've got to stay united, and we've got to make that 2% punch way above its weight with the general population. So I'll just leave you with that thought, and one other thought. My boss is running for re-election, so I just wanted to mention that. So thank you very much, Alan, and I'll leave it at that. I'll be happy to answer any questions if we have any, because I know we probably have time.
Thanks, Sandy. Anybody have any questions want to ask Sandy? You did a good job, Sandy.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.